I am a political science PhD student. Don't judge me, but the way I got into programming actually is going on 10 years ago now. I got involved in modding Xboxes, which is like a really nerdy way of like pimping your ride in a way, if you think about it. Except they don't make movies with Vin Diesel, But I got involved in this modding Xboxes, and I got really interested in it. So you could like put a mod chip in it, you could put a bigger hard drive in it, and do all this crazy stuff. And you can install Linux on it. And somehow my current boss, heard that I did that. And so he thought that because I could do that, I could program. Maybe I'd suggest that I could, but basically I got on the job and I had to learn, teach myself how to program. And so, so some of you are familiar with what that's like, just learning on the go. But with all that out of the way, let's get to Bitcoin here. So what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is pretty much the first of what we know as a cryptocurrency. And what a cryptocurrency is and what Bitcoin lets you do is basically you can send electronic money very quickly, and there's like there are transaction fees, but they're rather low. So it's a lot different than, let's say, like if you charge a credit card, somebody's taking a cut somewhere. This is a lot less, and it's kind of, even being tech savvy, it's almost magical. So like if you're sending Bitcoin to somebody, literally you just plug in your address into the client program, and then you plug in the amount that you want to send. You hit send, and 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, whatever, they get a notification that, wow, you've got Bitcoin. So it's really interesting. In order to actually do this, Bitcoin basically has 4 core properties. The first is that it's pseudo-anonymous, and so you don't have to reveal your identity to use Bitcoin. So you're writing a check. Who does anymore? But if you're writing a check, you sign your name, and same thing. If you're using a credit card, your name and all that information is tracked. Bitcoin is not truly anonymous, so somebody can go back and follow your transactions if they figure out who you are, but you can stay behind the scenes if you like, basically. It's decentralized, so there's no central entity that controls the money supply. So there's no Fed, there's no company that controls Bitcoin, and because of that, there's also no centralized service that stops working. So I don't think Facebook hardly ever goes down, but if you have a Facebook profile and all of a sudden Facebook stops working, well, you can't use Facebook. Bitcoin's not like that, it's decentralized. You can think of it almost like Napster. That's not quite what's going on, but it is very similar. It's a peer-to-peer network. It's secure, so obviously if you have any kind of financial system, you don't want people to make fraudulent transactions. That would screw the whole thing up. I'll get into how that happens, but it's secure, more or less. That transaction part is actually supposed to be transparent. It's transparent. So what makes Bitcoin work is there is something called the blockchain. And the blockchain essentially is a global ledger of transactions that have occurred. And so at any point in time, somebody can go back and look at, yes, this transaction has occurred, this transaction has occurred, I have this balance, and so on. This has actually been a problem in computer science and cryptography and I guess just people thinking about financial systems for quite some time. It was kind of the holy grail, so how do you actually get all these properties to work? In 2009, a white paper, it's actually pretty simple, it's like 8 or 9 pages, released by an individual called Satoshi Nakamoto, and more or less it solved the problem. So that's kind of the start of Bitcoin. Sorry, if I can get this figured out. Okay, so like I said, this is a hard problem. So when Satoshi first releases this white paper, people are pretty skeptical, like, bullshit, this isn't actually going to work. But then people realize he's got something here, it is going to work, and so the Bitcoin network starts running, and people start mining on the network. And I'll get into exactly what mining is in a few minutes, but people start mining on the network, and it's basically a way of generating Bitcoin. It's a way of creating a money supply. And despite the fact that people understood that Bitcoin works, Bitcoin was still more or less worthless. People would just mine these Bitcoins for days on end on their computers, and then they would delete the file that held their Bitcoins, or they'd throw away their hard drive that had the Bitcoins, and who could blame them? But by slowly over the next few years, by April of 2013, one Bitcoin was worth about $300 US. And as of last fall, you started having Chinese money and a lot of other just people speculating in it basically, and the value jumped to $1,300 for a single Bitcoin. So we're getting somewhere. So an example of people, like I said, people considered it worthless. Some guy in 2010, he spent 1,000 Bitcoin for 2 pizzas. And he spent that much because if he didn't spend that much, nobody was going to accept his Bitcoin. So he buys these 2 pizzas, and when the market got to the point it was last fall, that was worth about $7 million, or $7 million. So that's a $7 million pizza, I hope it tasted good, but once it hit that started climbing to that $1,300 USD value, the market cap is somewhere around 10 billion, which is not a huge company, but it's slowly getting somewhere. And so we now, within the beginning of this year, some companies like Tiger Direct and Overstock are now actually accepting this payment. Beforehand, people were basically just using it as a speculative tool, so they put money in and expect it to rise. But now it is actually starting to be used somewhat as a actual currency. This next slide is kind of absurd, but I don't know. This is, I guess, how I think it's a joke on how somebody sees Satoshi. Now, Satoshi is a very interesting figure, and there's starting to be kind of a mythology developed around him, because when he came out with this white paper, he didn't reveal who he was, he never identified himself. It's not obvious if Satoshi Nakamoto is a pseudonym, it's not obvious if, it's just not, who is he? And I guess the next slide is saying that. So he doesn't reveal his identity, and he's involved in the community for the first few years as it starts to grow. And then December 12th, 2010, he makes his last post, and then he just basically disappears from the face of the earth. Like, he just doesn't, nobody ever hears from him again. And so people are trying to figure out, as Bitcoin rises in value more and more, like I said, there's this mythology, so people want to know, who is this Satoshi fellow? So there's some, there's some theories. One of them is, so I think a guy's name is like Nick Sazvo, and he's been a cryptographer, been involved in that community for a long time. So people are like, well, Satoshi Nakamoto, similar names, maybe that's him. People have said, well, maybe it's some big companies pulling the resources, and so like it's Samsung, Toshiba, Nakamoto, and Nakamichi, and Motorola. I don't know. I read something on the internet where people have said, so if Bitcoin actually gets more and becomes like this global currency, it's going to be bizarre in like 50 or 100 years. You can just imagine historians going back, like, trying to figure out who this figure is. You could do textual analysis on a piece of text and match, a single individual to that. So there's actually some attempts at doing that. So there's questions about why he disappeared. Obviously he did disappear. Why? Did he lose interest in the project? Is he just kind of watching from the sidelines? Did he get worried as, has he starts accumulating more and more wealth? Does he get concerned about his safety? Hell, maybe he made his last post, walked out for a cup of coffee, and got hit by a bus. I mean, there's no telling, honestly. And this last one is kind of absurd, but I got to plug this movie whenever I can. So he's this brilliant, troubled financial whiz, and maybe he just made his escape. And so he's like a real-life Andy Dufresne, And if you don't get this reference, you need to see The Shawshank Redemption. It might change your life, all right? I'm just letting you know. So I was going into making this presentation and talking about Satoshi, and last week there was kind of this bombshell because Newsweek comes out with this expose of they found Satoshi Nakamoto. So this is apparently, if I can get this to work, this is apparently the Satoshi Nakamoto. I guess maybe not the same as that picture I showed you earlier, but so he's this 64-year-old man. He lives in California. He likes model trains. He's done contract work for the U.S. government. So they start piecing together why this is Satoshi. They run this analysis. But there's questions. So this man in particular, his name is Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto. So like if you look at some text that he's put online somewhere, what he writes, his writing style is very different from the Satoshi Nakamoto. So and then Satoshi actually comes out of hiding. The real Satoshi comes out of hiding and actually says, "I'm not Dorian." So the question is this just a brilliant old man like playing a trick? He's trolling everybody, like, I got you guys, or is this just mistaken identity? There's no telling. There is actually a UTD connection to Bitcoin, which is very interesting. Y'all should be proud of your school when I tell you this. There is an online black market started in 2011. It was called Silk Road, referring to the old historical Silk Road. On it, you could buy assassinations. Obviously, there's some sex trade, whatever. But the main thing that was going on was people were buying drugs, and people were usually using Bitcoins to make these transactions because again, it's pseudonymous. You don't have to meet somebody in person, hand them cash. You don't have to write a check. I mean, so it's an ideal tool to use. It's run by an individual named Dread Pirate Roberts, and that's a reference to like Princess Bride, an 80s movie. And it's doing well. They're making all kinds of money, and just hand over fist. But the FBI finally shuts it down because DPR apparently tried to put contracts out on some of his associates and have them killed. He didn't realize that the hitman he was hiring was like an FBI informant. So the alleged DPR is a person named Ross Ulbricht, and he's a UC alum. I think he graduated in like 2004, 2005, and he was like
Physics major.
Physics major, okay. But that's the alleged DPR. And so we'll get through this. So these are all his fake licenses, and so he's very Walter White-ish, he's this bumbling genius, I guess. So that's kind of the history of Bitcoin. Now let's get to how Bitcoin works. And this is not going to be technically accurate to the last detail, but this should cover the general idea. And Bitcoin is very interesting because the protocol is very intuitive once you grasp it. So like I said, Bitcoin more or less exists as this global blockchain, this decentralized blockchain that everybody has a copy of, everybody can look at. The blockchain, makes sense. That name is referring to the fact that the blockchain is composed of chains of blocks, okay? And within each block is basically all the transactions for about 10 minutes, okay? And so a transaction is basically what you think it's what it sounds like. It's, I want to send a certain amount of Bitcoin to this person. You can actually send multiple amounts to different people in one transaction, or you can just send to one person. And then also attached to that transaction is your signature if you're sending the money. And basically the signature confirms your identity just in the same way as if you signed a piece of paper that confirms that it is you. Attached to each block is what is called a proof of work. Okay, so going back to what a signature is, let me get back to that real quick. When you're sending money to an individual, the address you send to, like I said, it's pseudonymous, so the address that you use is more or less like a random scrambling of letters. It's not an email address, it's not immediately obvious. This address is generated what's known as a public key. And this goes back to cryptography. And you can give this public key to the world. You can almost think of it as a username. It's not 100% accurate, but that's pretty similar. The signature is generated using what is called a private key, and you keep your private key secret. You don't give it to people, and it's almost like a password, more or less. And the public key and the private key are basically generated based on, I don't remember which one generates the other, but they're related. So now, what is it? Proof. So what is a proof of work? As I said, blocks are added to the blockchain on an average about every 10 minutes. The people who add blocks to the blockchain are what are known as miners. And as I said, miners basically secure the network, and they're rewarded for mining. That's why it's called mining, like I guess digging for gold or whatnot. The miner that gets the reward, the miner's block that is accepted by the blockchain, is one that submits the correct proof of work. And what the proof of work is, it's based on a cryptographic hash function. And so Bitcoin in particular uses SHA-256 as its hashing function. And so if you feed into this function a piece of text like Satoshi, it's going to output what, again, looks like more or less random letters. What's very important is that it's very easy to go from the input to the output. It doesn't take a lot of computation. But it's very difficult to go from the output to the input, so it's very hard to reverse, basically. The way this is, hold on, let me collect my thoughts here. How this is associated with miners is miners essentially, into the hashing function, they feed an input stream, and then they also feed in, they attach the input string a number. And so they put it into the hashing function and out it comes. And what they're looking for is an output that starts with a 0, okay? And if they get that output, then it's considered a valid proof of work. Now, and if they don't get the output, obviously they're going to try another input to secure the network. It's a great question. Does anybody want to answer that actually? Go ahead.
Just like a real, on the block, that getting that number, it's solving the math puzzle, and it basically makes it so all right. So the blockchain is a ledger of all transactions and addresses, and all the ones that aren't confirmed get pulled into a block, and they get this function on it that has to be solved. And that basically, once that's solved, it gets added to the blockchain, and it's so that if somebody else tries to pull all the unconfirmed addresses into a block, they can't do it once you put yours in there first. So it's basically, once you solve it, the rest of the network will acknowledge that that's the next block in the chain.
And because the odds are, it's kind of low probability that you will find this block, that's kind of makes it all happen.
So it kind of serves as a way for the network to record a transaction,
right.
And it serves as a way to prevent people from making fraudulent transactions because needed.
Exactly.
25 Bitcoins are generated every 10 minutes, and that number, does that sound right? I'm pretty sure it's 25 and then it halves. It halves when the difficulty goes.
Yeah, every once in a while, yeah.
But I lost my train of thought.
Go ahead.
So if 25 Bitcoins are added every 10 minutes, where exactly do these Bitcoins come from? I mean, I realize that they come once you solve the puzzle,
Right.
but where are they stored anywhere before then?
They're not actually stored anywhere. The kind of an interesting thing about Bitcoin is there's no balances kept. There's just basically the transactions. So if you go back and look at the history of the transactions, you know that there's Bitcoins here. And essentially when a miner attaches a proof of work to a block, at that same time they create an additional transaction that sends Bitcoin, and it just generates it kind of out of thin air, but it sends the Bitcoin to them themselves.
So, okay, the thing that's hard to grasp is, this is a completely decentralized process.
Right.
So, how, I guess the reason that we know,
I mean, I don't want to get too caught up on the details. I'm not going to be able to explain it especially well. If you want to see what's going on, look at the white paper. If you've got some idea of what's going on with cryptography, and just look at the white paper, okay, and then go from there. Because I'm not going to be able to explain it real well. Okay. It works.
Okay.
It's magic.
Okay.
I would say like one big part of it is like there is an established limit on like how many Bitcoins there will ever be. And so, I mean, as the difficulty gets harder, we're going to be releasing less Bitcoins for every 10 minutes. So it's kind of self-regulating in that sense. So it's not like we're just making Bitcoins forever. Like we're not going to just keep creating them forever. They have kind of an increasing value because of the fact that we make it harder to find them as it goes on.
We're actually getting to that right now.
Yeah. So I'll leave it to you.
So these specific properties don't necessarily have to be set in stone. So, so Bitcoin is open source software. Anybody can go in and modify the software. They can tweak a property here and there. And so, for example, the hashing algorithm is something that can be tweaked. You do not have to use SHA-256 as your hashing algorithm. And a lot of newer coins, these are called altcoins, these modifications of Bitcoin code, they do not use this hashing algorithm because once Bitcoin started becoming more and more worthwhile, companies actually started producing these specialized units that were really good at hashing this function. And so now if you want to mine Bitcoin, you basically have to put in like tens of thousands of dollars to buy this specialized equipment to do it. This is problematic from the standpoint of if the only people that can mine are rich people, you start to get centralization of the network. And before long, maybe you can end up with somebody owning 51% of the network, and that's not good. Another thing that doesn't have to be set in stone is the 10-minute confirmation time. So like I said, Bitcoin on average uses 10-minute confirmation time. It does this for specific reasons, but if you think about this, do you want to go to the grocery store, buy a gallon of milk, and wait 10 minutes for your transaction to get confirmed? You probably don't. Now there's ways around this. You can do what are called no confirmation transactions, but they're not as secure. So again, there's things that can be tweaked for different, and maybe are for different reasons. Coming up, here's actually a picture of some of these specialized computing units called ASICs. These are actually very small ones. I think they're just USB ones. The big ones now are like massive. So some of the early altcoins that made some interesting changes, one in particular was called Litecoin. They went from a 10-minute transaction time to on average about a 2.5-minute transaction time. This is maybe a lot more reasonable for some people. They also changed from the SHA-256 hashing algorithm, they changed to a script algorithm. And what this meant is, it's hard to build ASICs for mining. You more or less have to use a graphics card. So a lot of video gamers have graphics cards. You can go out and buy a graphics card. So it makes the computation power, the mining power of the network much more decentralized. So that's kind of important. Another early altcoin is something called Primecoin. The hashing functions used by Bitcoin and Litecoin, SHA-256 and Script, they're more or less wasteful. Yes, they secure the network, but they're not actually generating anything useful. They're just generating bullshit, just random numbers, more or less. Primecoin was basically this idea of, let's use a useful proof of work, something that has, my screen down here real quick. Something that has some kind of value. And so its proof of work actually generates chains of prime numbers. Now this doesn't actually have any specific scientific value right now, but theoretically one day it could, and I guess it's added to human knowledge, so it's useful from that aspect. Also, this has the side effect of this proof of work basically is mined by CPUs, so that's another way of doing it. Instead of graphics cards or ASICs, you can also do CPU-based mining. I think another one that's very interesting, is actually kind of undervalued, is something called Peercoin. Instead of proof of work, it uses, in addition to proof of work, something called proof of stake. And more or less what proof of stake is if you have some coins, you can set them aside for a period of time, I think it's like 30 days or whatnot. And then once those coins have been vested for long enough, you as a miner can stick them to a block and send that out to the network and say, pay me. And it's almost like a way of generating interest. But the interesting thing about this proof of stake is computationally efficient because you're not really using CPU cycles, it's just based on the existing money supply. So currently, I think the Primecoin network is something like 80% times more energy efficient than the Bitcoin network. And you can imagine as time goes on, as Bitcoins use more and more, or Primecoins use more and more, this gap would grow more and more, to even greater heights. Which is interesting because, okay, if we have an energy crisis coming up, maybe that's an important thing. Peercoin is also inflationary. So Daniel was talking about how Bitcoin, it's not actually deflationary, but there's a total limit of Bitcoins that will ever exist. I think it's 21 million total that will ever exist. Now that limit's going to be reached in something like 2140, I believe. But the interesting thing is, because as I said, people will throw away their Bitcoins, they'll lose access to them. Bitcoin is, in a sense, is deflationary. Now, this isn't a problem from a transaction standpoint because it's also infinitely divisible. So maybe people stop transferring one Bitcoin and they're transferring a 16th of Bitcoin. That's okay. But the issue is, if your currency is deflationary, what incentive do people have to spend it? So you're better off just holding on to your money because the money supply is getting smaller and smaller, and your hold is going to be worth more and more. So Peercoin kind of combats that with actually being slightly inflationary. It might be linear inflation, I don't remember. And this goes into an old argument of Austrian versus Keynesian economics. And people can argue about that shit all day. Keynesian or Austrian is kind of a very libertarian mindset, and there's a lot of hardcore libertarians in the Bitcoin world. So, you see these arguments back and forth, whatever they're worth. So a very interesting altcoin, which is has more of a psychological effect than anything else. This thing called, it looks like Dogcoin, and I think that's a natural way to pronounce it, but officially it's called Dogecoin, which, whatever. But this is it. It's pretty goofy. Again, it's pronounced Dogecoin. There's kind of this mythology that at the beginning it was just a big joke by the developers, but it also maybe it's just brilliant marketing and brilliant planning. I'm not sure the true story there. Instead of giving out these small number of coins, they give out massive number of coins. So like the total supply of Dogecoin will actually be much larger than, so it's not 21 million like Bitcoin, it's like in the, I don't know, does anybody know the number? I want to say it's in the billions or trillions, like it's a massive number. And miners are rewarded like huge amounts of dough for finding proof of works. So what this does is, 1,000 Doge is actually worth a lot less than 1 Bitcoin, but because we're human beings and because big numbers and such, attract us, if you receive 1,000 Doge, it's like, wow, I got something, versus I only received 1 Bitcoin, you know what I'm saying? They also did another interesting psychological thing, so payouts to miners are actually a lottery. So Bitcoin has a set amount that's paid out each time. It's like maybe 25 Bitcoin or whatnot, I'm not sure the exact number. But Dogecoin, on the other hand, is like, again, it's a lottery, so you could get 500,000 and you could get 1 million. So this is another psychological thing. They built on Litecoin, so it's script-based, so people with graphics cards can mine. And then they added a meme to it, which is, let's get into the meme, because I think they're funny pictures. So you can't see it, shit. But basically what it is this really goofy picture of this dog, and there's broken English phrases scattered all around it, and it's like a thought cloud of what the dog is thinking. So, this one says, so scared, concerned, what you doing, and wow, here's another one. Yeah, I guess this is a, oh, come on.
Oh man, can you use the arrow key?
I tried, and uh-oh. So this is a Twinkie, much cake, you want, such delicious, good filled, such sponge, amaze, Here's another dog, nice scarf, blah, blah, blah. And then I thought this one was funny because it was making fun of Vladimir Putin's, I guess, like, being against homosexuals at the Olympics. So this dog is thinking, such straight, so Olympic, gold medal, no homo, much alpha. I don't know if the alpha is talking about Vladimir Putin or it's talking about the dog itself, but, So Dogecoin, this psychological experiment in a sense, comes out in 2010, December of 2013, and because it was this joke and people didn't take it seriously like they took Bitcoin, people just for the hell of it would tip each other. So you go onto Reddit, which is the website, and people would just tip 20 Dogecoin for the hell of it. You go to the IRC channel, people tip 100 Dogecoin to each other. And because people are tipping, there's transactions going back and forth, there's awareness in the sense that there's not in the Bitcoin community, because maybe you're reading a blog post and you see this tip. You're like, what the hell is Dogecoin? And so you go and look it up, and so that's interesting. And also because it's got a meme, it's kind of a friendly alternative to Bitcoin. It doesn't have this hardcore libertarian mindset that maybe puts some people off. But this joke became serious business. Sometime during the last month, it actually had a market cap over 100 million. And it just kept climbing and climbing and climbing because it was just a joke. And then people took it seriously. Once this happened, and slightly before that, now there's just this explosion of altcoins. People are just taking the code and tweaking it and adding whatever meme or cause they want to add to it and putting it out there and making some quick money off. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, there's actually a site, coingen.io. It was just a matter of time. Now it's just like completely automated. Like if you have an idea for an altcoin, you can go on there and put how many combinations you want, what algorithm to use, and the name of it, and upload an image. And you send these people these Bitcoin, and it will automatically generate a zip file for you. And there's just like, it's just pouring out of all these, every single combination you can think for a coin name, people have been trying to market.
So go ahead.
Well, I mean, this might be fundamentally different than what these other altcoins are doing, but I was thinking, I guess none of the altcoins have a central bank?
They don't.
Okay.
Because they're all decentralized the same way Bitcoin is.
Okay. So
well, I take that back. There's one called Ripple.
Yeah, Ripple has
been marketed by a big company, and apparently there's some advantages to centralizing because they can do transactions in different ways. But the whole thing, like there's 1 billion total supply of Ripple, and the company owns like 90% of it. So it's called like a scam coin, or people call that pre-mining. So there are some that are doing stuff like that, but in general they're decentralized.
Okay.
That's generally like the get rich quick aspect people come up with is they're like, I'm going to come up with this great coin and market it. Everyone's going to love it. But before I announce it to everybody, I'm going to have my miner going while the difficulty is nothing and mine like 10% of the entire supply. So if it does catch on, I can take these coins on an exchange and dump them and just make a bunch of money. People do that.
Isn't that what Satoshi Nakamoto did as well?
No, well, he still held, like, you can go on the blockchain and look, like, he hasn't spent, like, any of, he has, like, I think, like, what, $1 million or 1.5 million just, like, sitting in one address.
The US dollar worth is like 400 million. I don't
No,
know.
but, like, the actual coin
Yeah, I'm
amount.
not
It's,
sure.
oh, yeah, it's, like, something like 1 or 1.5 million coin. Like, no, he didn't actually do that. Like, he actually didn't touch any of his coins to this day. So, like, people speculate that maybe he lost his private key or something. And if you have the public key, private key, if you lose your private key, there's something called a brain wallet you can get around this. But if you're not using a brain wallet, you lose your private key, you're not going to be able to get into your wallet again.
The other important thing to think about Satoshi, and maybe this is just the way people talk about it, but so again, in the beginning, Bitcoin was worthless. So Satoshi and other people were mining, but it was like, collecting dirt. He wasn't like, it's different from these coins that are created today, and they have value immediately, and people have pre-mined that. So, and again, he's Satoshi, so I showed you that goofy picture. I think in 100 years, if Bitcoin takes off, because knowing people, like, somebody's going to be worshiping Satoshi. There's going to be, like, sayings of Satoshi. There's going to be Bibles of Satoshi. Who knows?
There's already kind of like, on the subreddit for Bitcoin, like, the alleged guy that he's got like already a huge following. Like they raised like something like 15 grand or something in a day for him, and like yeah.
So the Dorian Satoshi, that guy.
Yeah,
Okay.
like that guy, and that coin that you actually showed earlier of what they thought that he looks like, they actually photoshopped him on there. He's already got a huge following going.
So we've got these altcoins coming out, and so like some of them off the top of my head, there's a Ron Paul coin, there's a red coin, there's a black coin, there's a Take coin, which is referring to the guy from Star Trek. There's a kitty coin, there's a moon coin. I mean, there's any coin you could think of, a sex coin, pot coin, people are just coming out with it. But there's some interesting ideas. So a lot of them are blatant scams, but there's also some slightly interesting ideas. This next one might be a scam as well, but it's an interesting idea. This next one is called Aurora coin. And the idea behind that is the amount that's pre-mined Bitcoin, and I don't know if it's 30%, 25%, whatnot. This is actually put aside for the residents of Iceland. So Iceland has this ongoing problem with inflation. So over the last 10 years, inflation is like 1,000%. So this is kind of a statement against, I guess, what the Icelandic government's doing. And Iceland, they have some like an identification number that's not quite a social security number in the way that it should be confidential. Like you can use it to identify yourself. So the idea is, I think it's on like March 25th or something, there's going to be an airdrop. And any citizen of Iceland that wants to can claim their coins. And so if the net market worth of Aurora coin at that point is like 100 billion, well, you as a citizen of Iceland, you'd actually get something significant from that. But is it a scam? The creator, apparently either he's not from Iceland or he doesn't live there now, like he's in Panama, I don't know. Another coin, which I don't think is a scam, but it's a kind of a similar concept, is something called Maza coin. They're doing the same kind of set aside for an Lakota Sioux tribe, but apparently it's actually been officially adopted by this tribe, which makes it kind of a first of its kind as far as a sovereign entity adopting a cryptocurrency. So the thought process behind creating this, though, is on the reservation, unemployment is like 85 to 90%. Something like 75% of people living on reservation, on this specific reservation, I think it's like Pine Ridge, but like 95% of them are below the poverty level, and then obviously you have this ongoing conflict with Indian tribes not being happy with how the federal government treated them. So this is kind of like an FU to the federal government as well. So here is the question of how can you actually obtain Dogecoin, Bitcoin, whatever, yourself. The main way to get Bitcoin is by using USD and buying Bitcoin straight up. Here in the United States, a legitimate website is something called Coinbase, and they've done the proper paperwork with the federal government. Essentially what you do is you go on there, you provide your bank account information, which sounds scary. They do this because if you think about it, transactions on the blockchain are actually irreversible. So if you just paid with a credit card, what would happen is they would send you your Bitcoin and then you could do a chargeback. And so you'd have the Bitcoin and the money you spent. So they don't want that happening. They're asking for your bank account information to verify who you are. Once you submit that, it takes like 3 or 4 days, and then you can actually buy Bitcoin straight up. If you don't want to go through all that hassle, another option is something called localbitcoins.com. And this is basically a way of matching the local sellers and buyers. So you meet somebody in public. Again, probably do this in a public place.
I've done this. I actually went to Addison and bought half a Bitcoin from somebody
Really?
a while ago. Yeah.
And it was like it didn't feel scary or anything like
No,
that?
it was cool. Like the guy was cool. I met him in a coffee shop. He just said where to go, and I just paid him there. There are a lot of horror stories with that. There's actually, believe it or not, money can even get reversed. What some people do is they'll be like, all right, I'll deposit money in your bank account, and they'll bring the deposit slip, and then the person will call our bank and be like, okay, that balance is there. But a lot of banks had a stipulation that within 24 hours you can reverse that. So people do that and get their Bitcoin and reverse it. But there's all kinds of drama with doing local Bitcoins, though. I don't recommend it.
So yeah, there's a big risk. You're probably also going to pay a little bit above the actual market value because of this convenience, but it is an option. The thing with Doge and a lot of these other altcoins is you can't actually take American dollars and buy them in the same way from like Coinbase or something. I think there's some option out there, but it's not quite the same level of Bitcoin. The main way to get these, if you want to buy them, is you buy Bitcoin, and then you go to an online exchange. The big one is something called Cryptocurrencies. You go to this online exchange, you deposit your Bitcoin, and then you exchange that into whatever altcoin you want. That's probably the easiest way to obtain an altcoin if you want one. The other option, or you can also, beg for Bitcoins and IRC or something. But like I said on Reddit, if you visit the Dogcoin subreddit, like you can go on there and people just tip like crazy for saying stupid stuff. So that's an option. You can also mine some if you just want to get some to, see what it's like. As I said, you can't really mine Bitcoin profitably anymore. I don't know if you can even mine just to get a few. Do you have any clue? Like if you just turn on a little.
No, you can't. Because pools are like the majority now. So like unless the only thing you can really do is join something called a pool. Like there's one called ghash.io, and basically your CPU cycles and stuff, like your CPU time is like in a pool with a bunch of other people, and when there is a block reward, it's distributed relative to how much you contributed.
Right.
So you can, but it's like super small.
Not much, right. Okay. What you can do is mine an altcoin, and then as I said, go to one of these exchanges, and then instead of exchanging from Bitcoin to the altcoin, you go from the altcoin to Bitcoin. So that's a way to obtain Bitcoin. So the way you do this is you sign up for a mining pool, as he was talking about. Because you're only one computer or one graphics card, the probability of you finding a block is very, very low. So what people do is they all pull their resources together into a single pool. If somebody in the pool finds a block, then the reward is distributed evenly across the pool. And you're not going to get a lot, but that is a way of mining. You have to download some mining software. A popular one is something called CG Miner. Then once you get that, you enter your pool information, the right settings for your video card, and you start mining on your graphics card. So Dogcoin's a good one to do. Now, that's if you just want to get some for the hell of it. The thing is, if you want to mine for profit, there's certain things to put into consideration. So first of all, it's energy costs. If your computer's running 24/7, your graphics card is running 24/7 mining, you're using electricity, obviously. So ideally, you want whatever amount of Dogcoin or whatever you're receiving to have more value than the energy you're wasting, right? There's also changing network difficulty. So as more and more people join like Dogcoin mining it, as I said, the networks will adjust the difficulty. So the difficulty will get greater and greater and greater. So the amount of coins you will receive will decrease. And then of course there's value of the coin. So I mean, you could even mine a coin that's not profitable for you to mine right now. So like it's not energy efficient or the network difficulty is too high. But if you feel like in the next 6 months that coin all of a sudden is going to skyrocket, well, you stash it and maybe you get lucky. Or on the other hand, the value of the coins could decrease. So you spend time mining and all of a sudden it starts losing value and you're losing value. So people put these specialized mining rigs together. This is like 6 AMD cards put together. It's like 2 or 3 power supplies plugged into one main board. This is like $2,000 total. And this guy is just betting that basically over the next 6 months, energy costs will be low enough and the value of Dogecoin will be high enough that he will pay off his rig in like 6 months. And then after that point, it's like pure profit. But again, you're taking a risk. You're sinking $2,000 into it. Go ahead.
Like a few months ago, there was a huge shortage of AMD cards.
Right.
Because people kept buying them for Litecoin money.
Right.
I saw pictures of guys with like boxes up to their
Oh, yeah.
garage.
Yeah, if you were trying to buy an AMD card about 2 or 3 months ago, the prices have stabilized now, but it used to be that AMD cards were like $100 to $200 above their original retail value because people were just buying them in droves. NVIDIA cards have not quite felt the same effects because they're not as, they're more power efficient, but they're not as powerful. You don't get as much hash rate when you're mining, so you get less reward. And so NVIDIA hasn't seen that same thing. The interesting thing, NVIDIA released a new graphics card a month ago called the 750 Ti, but it's very, very power efficient, which means that it just sips electricity. And so, and it actually has decent hash rate. So it's like $150, so you could plug that in, it's not using much electricity, and maybe you make some money, maybe you don't. I mean, the other option is you could sell off your graphics card down the line for 75% or something and get your money back. But this is, you're taking a risk, period, you know. It's an option. Your other option is day trading. I have maybe a horror story personally doing this. This chart here is actually the Aurora Coin 30-day market breadth, and it's kind of small, but this very bottom point is February 28th. The very top point is, I guess that's about March 4th, so this is about within 1 week. And the value went from, well, 0 Satoshis, which is an eighth of a Bitcoin, to over, what is that? I can't see, well, I got the damn, 8,000, or 800,000, I don't know. It jumped like 1,000% is what I'm saying. So basically, so I saw this jump. I actually, about 2 or 3 months ago, with my bonus check I got from work, I said, I saw Dogecoin jumping in value, you know. It was going up 100% every week. So if you think about it, put in $100 and Dogecoin goes up 100%, you now have $200. So like, there's no way this could go, right? So I put in $2,400 into Dogecoin because I'm retarded. And I got lucky. Actually, it did increase over the next week, but I put in more money. Actually, I didn't put in my full $2,400 at first, but I put in more money at the top of the market, which is not a good thing to do because the price started declining. And so I'm like, oh God, this is not a good decision. So you know, I wrote this little price tracker so that I could keep track of the Dogecoin price. And it just started getting like really sad to just look down there and see like minus $800, minus $1,000. And so like, I've got to do something about this. So I see Aurora Coin jumping in value. And I'm like, you know, it had gone up like 4% in the last few days. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to do this. I put all my money into Aurora Coin. It was not the smartest move. But I checked the next day, and I had lost like $1,000 on Dog, but all of a sudden I had made up like $1,200 by placing it into Aurora Coin. And so I'm like, all right, I'm a day trader. I'm liking this. I see that this coin, I told you about Mazacoin. Mazacoin's jumping. It had gone up like 400% in one day. And the only exchanges that you could actually get Mazacoin were like these shady exchanges. But I didn't care because I wanted to make some money. So I put all my money that I had made from Aurora Coin into Mazacoin. I go to sleep. I check the next morning, and I'm like, oh God, the market's down. I just lost my money. That was really stupid. But I plug it in the calculator, and I realize that I've actually made $6,000 in the last 2 or 3 hours. And I'm like, oh my God, this is absurd. This is absurd. I check back over the next few hours, and the value is still climbing. The market is just skyrocketing. I've made $8,000. I made $10,000. At one point, I was at $12,000. And again, this happened in like 3 or 4 hours. I've never in my life made money this quickly. So in the back of my mind, you know, I'm bragging to my coworkers and stuff. You know, I know this is bad idea to brag because I know I'm going to lose the money. But so in the back of my mind, I'm like, there's an ideal point to sell. Obviously, you know, sell right now, and I've got $10,000. But you know, I'm like reading these online forums, and as I said, Mazacoin, you know, has officially been adopted by the Cyber Tribe, which is kind of unique. It hasn't been put on it hasn't been put on Crypto yet, the main exchange yet, and apparently there's going to be this Wall Street Journal article in a few days. So people are talking insane valuations. They're saying that it's going to go up, 10 times from where it's at. It's going to go up 50 times from where it's at. So I'm thinking, $10,000 is nice. I could, put a down payment on a car or something. But $100,000, $500,000, that's like life-changing money. So I'm like, I got this. I'm not even scared. And then I should have been scared because the market started declining. But I didn't care because I'm thinking in the back of my mind, okay, the market's declining, but this Wall Street Journal article is going to hit, it's going to hit this minute change and it's just going to skyrocket. It doesn't matter. I made a decent day trading move. Like originally I had like 107,000 Maza coins. I've sold out when the market was high, bought when it was low, went back up, so I made like 30,000 extra Maza coins. But there was also a moment where I literally hit the wrong button and sold like, a tenth of my Maza coins out for like below market values. And there was a point where I literally thought I had sold them all off for nothing, and that was terrifying. But, so the market keeps going down, but I'm just waiting. We get to Friday. I've been spending all night working on this stupid-ass terrorism paper. But Friday morning, I'm exhausted. I check the markets, and I see that it's been listed on currency. And I'm like, here it goes. And sure enough, in the first 5 or 10 minutes, it goes up 20 or 30%. And I'm like, oh, it's on. I've got to get back into Maza. So I try to check my exchange, and it won't load. It's over. The servers are overloaded. And I'm so mad because I'm losing money, literally losing money at the time. But I finally get there. I get to put in a buy order. And about the time I put my buy order in, the server stops working again, and Cryptocurrencies crashes as quickly as the price had skyrocketed, it went down. And so I couldn't do anything because my server's not working, and I need to go to school. So I was like, screw this. Long story short, I had made $10,000 in it. Now I've lost $1,000 on what I invested. So day trading is an option. You can make a lot of money. You can also lose a lot of money. If you have any gigs of personality, if you gamble, do not do this, okay? Do not do this because it's a lot of fun. But it's also interesting because you get to learn financial markets. So I've started to pick up, like I can see that people are pumping a coin or they're dumping a coin. So you start to see these things and you don't know about them at first. So, if you want to take a chance, put in $50 or something you don't care about it and just see what happens and, reinvest that profit. It's fun to do. I'm just saying. That's another option. So we've gotten into, what Bitcoin is, who Satoshi is, how it works, what's the next, what's coming up for Bitcoin, what can we look at in the future. So as I said, Bitcoin is essentially this blockchain, this global ledger of transactions. You can almost think of it as like this global distributed database, which is really convenient if you think about it. So if you have this property, this can represent something much more significant than just payments. You don't just have to track financial transactions in the blockchain. So an example I ran across was this concept of smart property. What the idea is, so if you go buy a car right now, you're going to get a title for that car. And if you sell that car to somebody else, you transfer the title. They put the title in their name. And so there's all this physical paperwork and whatnot. You can, on the other hand, in some future world where people trusted Bitcoin enough, you could actually store this transfer of title in the blockchain itself. Now how this would happen is, when you bought the car, the company that was selling you the car would create a unique Bitcoin address, almost like a serial number for that car, right? They would then transfer one Bitcoin. It's not really one Bitcoin, you wouldn't transfer $600, but transfer some amount from that master address to your address. And basically that says you have ownership of the car. Then once you resell the car to somebody else, you transfer the Bitcoin from your address to somebody else's address. And because the blockchain are wising up to it, and they stop allowing that to happen, so like they start creating CD keys. You have to have a specific CD key to install your copy on a single machine. But even this was easy to hack. So StarCraft was a game I remember that had CD keys, and after a while hackers just had a CD key gen, so they could just generate CD keys, and it's the same stuff. Companies start getting onto this more, and they're not happy with what's going on, and so you get something like Valve's Steam service or EA's Origin service. And with these services, I'm sure a lot of you have used them. But if you want to buy a game, you go on their service, you buy it, you download it, you have it tied to your account basically, and from then on, any computer you get on, you just log onto your account and you have access to that game, right? It's convenient for consumers because you don't have to go to the store and buy a game. You just download it at your own leisure, basically. But on the other hand, as consumers, we're losing rights if you think about it, because so if you buy a console game these days, you can, if you get tired of it and you decide it's not good, you go to the store and resell it. Or you can sell it to somebody else. Or you can lend it to somebody else. You can't do that with like Steam, you know? You can't lend the game to somebody else. You can't resell it. It's stuck in a sense. The other thing to consider is some people get like their Steam accounts banned because either they did something naughty or by mistake. And so, you know, they've got like hundreds of dollars worth of games on their Steam account and they get banned and they lose access to all of it. Or, you know, Valve, I don't think this is going to happen anytime soon, but let's say they go out of business. Well, you lose access to everything you bought. This is not the same way if you have physical copies of something. Think of books the same way. You know, 10 years ago, you buy a physical book, you can resell it, you can destroy it, you can trade it to somebody. But like Amazon with Kindle, ebooks are very convenient, but you're limited as to what you can do. So my thought process was, you can use the same smart property concept for video games to represent like serial keys. So like today, Titanfall came out. So if EA was going to use this system, what they would do is they'd create a master address that represented Titanfall specifically, okay? And if you bought that game from them, they would then transfer an amount from their master key, their master address, to your address. And when you went to play that game, the software would basically just verify that you had a transfer at some point from the master address, right? Obviously, it's very easy to then lend the game to somebody else. You transfer it to their address, they transfer it back to you, you can resell it, and you're not reliant upon a central service. You're kind of getting away from maybe monopolies and centralization. Now, this is all just a proof of concept, and it's like one Python file, and it's not secure or anything, but it's just a thought process, and these are the kinds of things you can do. Another application of this, and I think this is interesting as a political scientist, is voting. So our current voting systems are adequate, but obviously they have issues. So if you go back to 2000, Bush versus Gore, you have that whole hanging chat issue. So, you know, the machine that's supposed to punch holes in the ballots doesn't properly punch the holes in the ballot, so we're not sure who it was for. You know, that's a major issue. In 2004, there was some concern about voter fraud because Diebold is a corporation that creates a lot of the voting machines. Well, they're a corporation. Now, we assume that they're honest. Maybe we give them the benefit of the doubt, but are they pulling strings behind? You know, we don't know. We just don't know if they're honest. So, and then you just have claims of voter fraud. You know, this is always a problem in Texas, and it's a political issue, but there's also a little legitimate concern about it. You just want to make sure that people who say they're voting are voting, you know, of course. So you could imagine this vote coin. And so the U.S. government creates a vote coin, and they have machines all over the country that, you know, secure the network and do the mining, right? When the election cycle comes up, the U.S. government sends a batch of vote coins to each polling place, right? And then once you as a voter go to the polling place, you are assigned one vote coin, and then you deposit that vote coin into your preferred candidate's address. So this is therefore a very easy way to tally votes. It's a very easy way for third parties to verify that, you know, honesty is going on. It's also, you can get good measure of like demographics and stuff like that. Again, because this idea of security is inherent in the blockchain, this could make corruption a lot less of an issue. You have issues like, so, you know, here in the United States we have a secret ballot, you know. You have a right, nobody should know necessarily who you voted for. We do this so, first of all, people can't vote for somebody and then go, or sell their vote basically, but you also don't want people intimidated into being forced to vote one way or the other. So, I don't know how this goes along with the secret ballot or whatnot, but you can imagine something like this evolving into something that's used for e-voting. Obviously, all the Bitcoin transactions are happening electronically anyway, so we could do this on the internet, e-voting, instead of going to physical polling places. Or could it enable more direct democracy, so direct citizen voting on issues? Another concept is something, I'm getting towards the end here for the record, I don't want y'all to get too worn out. Another concept is something called colored coins. What colored coins are, and coloring is kind of a weird terminology for it, but more or less what coloring a coin does is tagging it and saying this batch of Bitcoins represents something else. So let's say Mark Cuban's made some statements about Bitcoin. He's kind of tech savvy. So let's say he wants to create a math coin. Well, he could go and clone Bitcoin like all these other people have done. Or he could just color or tag as a batch of Bitcoins, and those Bitcoins from then on recognize this map points if you have the right client software that's recognizing the coloring. Interesting idea. What this leads into, if you combine voting and you combine color coins, you get this concept of decentralized autonomous corporations. More or less, corporations would be hosted on a blockchain. Shares of the company would be a colored coin, so shares would be sold off, they could be divided easily, just as Bitcoin is. And then shareholders obviously can vote on issues the same way I was describing voting earlier. A very, very interesting project is something called Namecoin. So as I've been saying, all these uses of the blockchain are basically just using transactions back and forth, right? They're not actually, we're not adding anything to transactions, but if you do that, if to each transaction you add a key value pair, you add that piece of text, you then get something very interesting. So Namecoin was created to serve as a decentralized DNS. Now DNS, what it is, I'm sure some of you know, but obviously you go to your browser, you type in www.google.com, and it redirects you to some IP address. It doesn't redirect you to that one, that's localhost. But basically that's a convenience, so you don't have to remember every IP address. Can you imagine every website you wanted to visit, imagine remembering those IP addresses? It's just not feasible. So DNS maps domain names to IP addresses. But DNS is centralized, so they control registration and renewal. Obviously, anytime you have centralization, you've got politics of different types. They control what new, what are the endings of the domain names called? I'm sure what
TLDs.
Go ahead.
Top level domains.
Top level domains, okay. So you've got, obviously, you've got .com, .net, .org. So they decide what new ones are added. So I saw like there's, a .sexy that's been added, and there's like a .horsey that's been added. How many domains?
They're going to add like 400 or 500 this year.
It's absurd.
Yeah.
It's absurd, it really is. But anyway, so Namecoin, because they're attaching a key value pair to a transaction, you then can store this mapping of domain names to IP addresses in the blockchain. So imagine if you typed into your browser, what you do is check against a blockchain. Google.com, what's the IP address that matches that and redirects you? You don't any longer have a centralized DNS system, you have a decentralized one. It's very interesting. You can build a lot of stuff on top of that. An example is something called BitMessage. It's a secure PTP messaging system. And it uses the same concept of cryptography to actually encrypt the messages. But basically, the messages are stuffed in the blockchain in transactions, and somebody gets the address and can look at the message on the other end. There's also distributed Twitter that's been built called Twister. Interesting. A couple more slides here. All these concepts are exciting, but we have an issue because the Bitcoin code base is, for a lack of a better word, it's corrupted. It wasn't really designed, it was put together by academics, and it's just slowly evolved. So you just kind of got this system that just uses different terminology and uses different concepts all over the place. So if you're trying to implement the Bitcoin protocol, you gotta know what you're doing, it's not fun. And it's C++, that's a sarcastic yay because I won't touch C++, I'm sure a lot of other people won't. And the protocol was not designed for use. So it was never designed with Namecoin in mind. It wasn't designed with Votecoin in mind. It was designed for financial transactions, right? So basically, anything you add to the code base is more or less a hack on top of it. So it's getting uglier and uglier as you add stuff. So I was reading the other day, Namecoin's facing this issue where they diverged from the Bitcoin code base at some point. And so Bitcoin has kept evolving and is at a certain version, but Namecoin is way behind. But because they have these additions to their code base, they can't catch up to the latest version and get these new features, the security, etc. So it's a major issue, really. There's also the issue that the core developers of Bitcoin, they do not want the blockchain being used for additional information. And there's a reason for this. Because every single transaction obviously is added to the blockchain. But if you add additional data to the blockchain, you're just exacerbating that effect. So if you download the Bitcoin client tonight and start it up and want to send off a transaction, you have to wait I think the last time it was 7 or 8 hours to download the entire blockchain. And that's only transactions over the last several years. So if you imagine 5 or 6 years from now, Jesus, gigabytes and gigabytes of data, and it's just not fun. So blockchain size is an issue. So developers do not want additional stuff added to the blockchain. Makes sense. Note there are light clients that don't require you to download the additional blockchain, but if you're using something like a light client, it's not pulling this extra information. So Namecoin can't use a light client, for example. The official client does provide it's a JSON RPC interface for like interacting with the Bitcoin protocol, and it's kind of neat. So like you can create new addresses with it from like Python or Ruby or Java, whatever you're using. So you can go in and like create new addresses on your local wallet. You can check your balances on your local wallet. So an issue I ran into with like developing Descent was you can't like look at somebody else's address and see the balance they have if you don't own it. So you got to use some other code base, and again, it just gets more and more complicated. It's not fun, and it's hard for Bitcoin to evolve in these new directions because they now have a $10 billion market cap. The core developers don't want to do something that's going to lose $5 billion, and that makes sense. So they're very conservative. A new project that came out in December is something called Ethereum. What Ethereum is basically, it's some developers that have been hacking on the Bitcoin protocol for a long time. One of their stated goals is that Ethereum should be simple enough, the implementation should be simple enough that even an average programmer should be able to put it together, which is cool. They decided so simplicity of implementation is more important than just tweaking the last 10% out of your code base and making it more and more complicated. They're also including all these recent Bitcoin developments that aren't going into the core Bitcoin protocol because of the conservative attitude we're talking about. So one is something called Ghost. The people who are behind Ghost were claiming these transaction speeds so Bitcoin currently can only do 7 transactions per second. Now that works okay right now, but if you imagine it being a global currency, 7 transactions per second is not going to cut it. That's a major issue. The developers of Ghost basically were quoting these insane numbers like transaction times of 1 second instead of 10 minutes and thousands of transactions per second. Now Ethereum's not quite at that level, but you can see the kind of improvements they're putting into their code base. Probably the main thing that Ethereum is I guess hoping for is they're building a scripting language. Go ahead.
Well, you said earlier that blocks are verified every 10 minutes.
Right.
So that's how long it takes for a transaction to be verified. But you also said that Bitcoin's protocol can only verify 7 transactions per second. So how is that tied together?
Okay, so blocks are added. I don't know how to explain this to anyone here.
I mean, the transactions are different from the blocks, so I mean, you're going to have the steady blocks every 10 minutes, but you could have any number of transactions just depending on who's buying and selling stuff.
So the blocks just verify transactions, but it takes 7 seconds for it.
A block is a bundle of transactions, so you can imagine there could be a block, and for 10 minutes there are only 2 transactions. That block only has 2 transactions. But the block could also contain, if you're talking about 7 transactions per second, I don't know what that number is, but it could contain up to that number. But that's a total number of transactions for that 10 minutes. So again, there's a hard limit, which doesn't scale real well when you're talking about a global currency. Okay. So Ethereum's calling card is this scripting language built in. Bitcoin does actually have a scripting language built in, but it's locked down and not really used because the developers are scared of what it might do because it's not really been tested and made sure that it's secure. But Ethereum is really focusing on this. So users can actually write these little scripts, these contracts, that will live on the blockchain and basically act as bots. And so you would pay for these contracts using Ether, and you would pay for them to run on other people's machines using Ether. But more or less, you could implement all these systems like name coin, color coins, voting, escrow systems. There's even talk of decentralized Dropbox. You could implement these in the scripting language very simply, very easily. It's a lot easier than going and hacking on a C++ code base, right? So as an example, the name coin clone is 15 lines of scripting language. It's kind of an ambitious project, but it's an interesting one. It's worth keeping an eye on. So what does this all mean, just period, just in general? At this point, we don't really know, honestly. I mean, we've got a bunch of people speculating in currency. We've got an idiot day trader like me. We don't know. Could this become a global currency, or is it just going to remain this niche, geek thing? We don't know. There are, what's important here is it is an idea of a decentralization of power. So, you have this long-term trend in all kinds of systems, whether it's government or corporations, etc., where you have this greater and greater and greater centralization of power. And as society, obviously, we got to think about that. And so Bitcoin's interesting from the concept of, not to get into some crazy libertarian stuff, but it's interesting from that aspect of just giving power back to the people decentralizing power. I don't know what it means, but it's cool. Importantly, the reactions of governments is really interesting. So like Russia's outright banned it because of good old Vladimir Putin, you know, he's crazy. China's taken like a neutral stance. You can't actually use it as currency, but you can use it as, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a commodity, basically. You can speculate in it, basically. The U.S. has actually held like some Senate committee hearings about it. It hasn't really gotten past that. They were actually kind of positive. But if you think about it, so you can go back and track all these transactions. The government probably loves something like that. If you could track every transaction that's ever happened, that's like, you know, that's just an ideal role for the government. So maybe this, from that aspect, is actually something that governments really want to grab hold of. So as an example, some of these people that were making trades on Silk Road with Bitcoins, you know, have actually had legal proceedings go against them based on that evidence, based on the blockchain evidence. So don't make drug deals with Bitcoin because you're going to get caught.
Well, on the Silk Road, they use this thing called a tumbler. There's this thing called, they have some ways to hide your activity on the blockchain because you can create a new wallet instantly. So they have these things called tumblers, like they had it on the Silk Road, so it would basically do a bunch of microtransactions back and forth to randomly generated wallets to kind of scramble it to cover that up.
So they're shuffling the records.
Yeah.
Basically, like a bunch of people give all their Bitcoins, like just small fragments of the Bitcoins, and just shuffles them all, and then gives you back the same amount that you put in, but it's from a billion random places. And so it makes it extremely hard to track the movement of those coins.
It's certainly a way of covering your tracks. I saw recently, so one of the big exchanges called Mt. Gox, which started out as like a Magic the Gathering trading card place, but it turned into like a Bitcoin exchange. They like absconded with everybody's money, or they say they got hacked, whatever. They're starting to be like legal proceedings against them, whatnot. But there's some discussion. So there's like when they went down, they had like, you know, they had thousands of Bitcoins in their possession. That were other people's, right? And so there's discussions about could they, you know, transfer these Bitcoins without other people finding out that they're doing this. And there is a discussion of like tumblers. But apparently, once you get past a certain size of Bitcoins, like even using tumblers is not really feasible. So there's a limit.
I was going to say, for the Mt. Gox thing, there's something like, I think, 180,000 coins at this one address. And everybody's watching that address. And like any movement out of that, like everybody freaks out and the rabble commences. So yeah, like you said, you can't hide it. The ledger, everybody can see it. So and everybody knows that that's their address. So that's kind of a nice thing about that.
On the other hand, if you're making you're making a legitimate transaction, but you don't necessarily want people knowing about it, that's kind of inconvenient. I guess you could use a tumbler with them.
Yeah, or you could just like create a new wallet, instantly transfer your money to that new wallet, and then, but yeah.
So there have actually been attempts, like I said, Bitcoin is just pseudo-anonymous, it's not actually anonymous. There have been attempts of, you know, implementing anonymity into the protocol. But the question there is, okay, so if you implement true anonymity into the protocol, you don't require tumblers and whatnot, how do governments react? All of a sudden, money launderers can go crazy. So you have this balance of, yes, keeping your privacy is good, but maybe you don't want to take that too far.
Well, but if you introduce true anonymity and not just pseudonymity, I don't know how you say it, then how would you know who has what coins, right?
I mean, you would still own your address, so you could still see what Bitcoins are your address, and people would tell you, this is me. I mean, people could still identify themselves, but they would just be, their tracks would be hidden unless they decided to expose them. Does that make sense?
So, but then you wouldn't have, then the blockchain would be completely different, right?
I mean, that's part of it, but people building this into the protocol are having to create like completely different things. So it's a drastic change, yes.
From the standpoint of money laundering, the Bitcoin is too finite. The number of coins is so small compared to the amount of money that the bad guys want to launder.
Right.
That is just not feasible.
That's true.
So really, Bitcoin can only be used by small time money launderers,
Right.
and that's probably a good thing.
Right. But if, so, Bitcoin's very small right now, but if it grew and the market cap did get to the point where money launderers could use it in that way, that is
If
possible.
you look at the paper money in the world now, it's 100 trillion
Yeah,
in all of the derivatives and whatnot. So 21 million Bitcoins, there's no way
well,
that it'll match how big.
no, I mean,
the
you're
paper
right, it's
money-
very unlikely that Bitcoin's ever gonna reach that level of circulation, but the 21 million limit, keep in mind, one Bitcoin could represent 20,000 US dollars, and it can also be infinitely divisible, so.
Yeah.
So, but you're right on what you're saying.
That was another thing I was thinking about a while back. The fact that it seems on the face of it that Bitcoin would be deflationary because there's a finite number of Bitcoins. But then they're infinitely divisible. So in a way, there's an infinite number of ways
Well,
because.
as I said, that doesn't hurt from the transaction perspective, so you could go on making transactions of like a 30-second, I don't know how to say that, but a very small amount of Bitcoin.
Right.
But there's still the deflationary aspects. You can't get around that even if you have an infinitely divisible money supply.
You could, in theory, hack a penny in half and treat it as a half penny, but people just don't do that because it's small enough. The Bitcoin, that you can actually cut it in half. And so, half Bitcoin sort of works that way. It's sort of like gold. Like
Yeah.
when you have like a nugget of gold, you can actually cut it in half. And then you can cut that in half.
Comparing it to a gold nugget is a better way of looking at it because people are hoarding
Right.
the Bitcoins, and that is incredibly deflationary. That's more deflationary than any other effect with Bitcoin, that people can, like Satoshi, if Dorian is Satoshi, he has 6 kids. He can leave his 1.5 million Bitcoins to his 6 kids, and they will have a hell of an inheritance.
Real quick before I get to you, just on that note, so like this expose of Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto is actually it was kind of disgusting what was done because they did not respect his privacy at all. They just went after him, and it's actually really dangerous for him now because whether he's the real Satoshi or not, the real Satoshi has, like I said, like 400 million USD of Bitcoin. So this guy lives at home with like his 93-year-old mother. Any person, any moron could go and who knows.
Yeah, it's not just like money like in a bank, like where if something like that happened, like when banks get robbed and stuff, like they can reverse, they can like manipulate fiat. But with that, it's like $400 million of like anonymous, like semi-anonymous money. You know what I mean? Like it's a huge threat.
Nobody's protecting him from getting robbed at gunpoint, basically.
Yeah, like I said, he's just a single individual. So, and even if he has this $400 million net wealth, he doesn't. It's not like he's got bodyguards or anything. He's not like these other wealthy people. So, this poor guy.
The news reporter got a bodyguard though.
It was pretty disgusting. Go ahead.
My question is, like, if we want to use that as a currency, then, like, what keeps it from, like right now it's treated as a commodity.
Right.
Like, for it to be a currency, people would have to accept it for something, right?
Very
But the
true.
price fluctuates constantly.
Got it.
Okay. So my question is, like what's the future of that?
Okay, so you do see some slowdown in the price increases. So like it's been, and it still fluctuates too much right now. But like, so it's been pretty solidly in like the 600 USD range for several months. Now the thing is, that's because its market cap is so small. So as the market cap grows bigger and bigger, it gets more and more difficult for it just gets more and more difficult for the value to fluctuate rapidly. So people just have to basically trust in this, start using it more, and companies have to decide to accept it. So like I said, like TigerRect, basically the second-tier companies that are trying to get one of their competition are starting to accept it. But if legitimate companies start accepting it, that's when you start, I guess you see the breakthrough point, you see the threshold where it goes from just being a speculative instrument to an actual currency.
And you see a lot of price fluctuation in real world markets, especially when you're transferring from stock in France. If you're trying to buy stock in France, you will actually have to go through a brokerage firm, and they will have to figure out what the transfer rate is going to be for dollars to products or use whatever.
So my last thing here, before we can get to questions, just a sec. My last thing is here. So we've got this question of how will governments react, but how do people react? So he was mentioning earlier, so it's kind of like invisible money in some sense. Do people trust this internet money, this invisible money, this virtual money in the same way they do U.S. dollars, you know? And does a worldwide currency scare some people? You know, honestly, like, so religious fundamentalists, you know, start thinking of like this world currency, you know, the mark of the beast, like legitimately, I could see people starting to like react based on those kind of things. But it's early. There's no telling where we go from here, you know, so that's it. So whatever questions or whatever you want to say, feel free. Go ahead.
Right. So, like earlier, you've mentioned a lot about decentralized ways of verifying game purchases, transferring titles, tracking voting. But why must they be done on top of like the Bitcoin protocol? Because like if the Bitcoin protocol is made for transaction purposes, why isn't it better to build like your own protocol to like track voting than to build that on top of the Bitcoin?
That's kind of the idea of Ethereum and projects like it is to build a separate protocol that is designed to do these different things.
So right now the only reason why we're talking about building these protocols on top of Bitcoin is because Bitcoin is already so big that it's easy to adopt.
And hell, it's interesting to see people's reactions. So like, you know, you've got these hardcore Bitcoin fanatics and they rail against like, you know, big currency and federal government and banksters and all this stuff. But on the other hand, like these altcoins come out that have like these innovations and stuff, and like they treat them the same way like, you know, real banksters treat, you know, Bitcoin fanatics, if you think about it this way. So it's just there's something better doesn't exist basically at this point, and people are just trying stuff. Like I said, it's early, so that's what's going on. Go ahead.
I've heard of this site that someone was telling me about, where it uses an algorithm to try to mine the most profitable coin at any given point in time. Have you heard of that?
I think it's called multipool, and yes, the idea is every miner on the network basically uses the same software, so it basically is software that will mine script-based algorithm coins. And the pool will switch, so if Dogecoin jumps in value, the pool will switch to mining Dogecoin, and if Dogecoin decreases in value and something else is more profitable than mine, it'll jump to that. That actually has has some serious implications for the security of all these blockchains. So if you've got, you know, all this hashing power on one coin, and then all of a sudden they just abandon it, then their network's open and is insecure. So this explosion of altcoins and what you're talking about multiples in particular, I mean, it's dangerous. It might decrease people's perception of legitimacy.
So, wait, hold on, why do you say it's dangerous again?
Because you're losing security of the network. You don't have consistent hashing power securing the network. You've got people, you know, jumping onto a profitable coin and then just abandoning it wholesale. And then there's not, you know...
Okay, so you have that spike and those falls.
Right.
Well, because somebody could take 51% basically and start falsifying transactions. So when you lose computing power, you're making it easier for one entity to gain that 51%.
Well, when they gain the 51%, that means that they can get most of the coins, right? Or are you saying that they could completely falsify the blockchain?
That's more or less what would happen. The falsification, they couldn't generate new coins out of thin air, but what could happen is they could double spend. So what they could do is they could say, well, I sent 500 Bitcoins to John. And then they create a separate transaction that says, I'm sending these 500 Bitcoins to somebody else. And it's the same amount of Bitcoins, but because they have the hash power of the network, they can stick these fraudulent transactions and falsify.
Okay, I guess that goes back to having to read the white paper.
Right.
They can create race conditions and win some.
Oh, okay.
Right.
So when you say that, are every security concerns about Bitcoin and these cryptocurrencies, do these only matter when some entity has over 51% of the network, or are there any other scenarios where security could be compromised?
There is a very worrying scenario in the hashing algorithm, the SHA-256. A 12-year-old kid could show up one day and create a mathematical shortcut to do the hash much faster. This is occurred with other hashing functions.
But if that happens, like every credit card company is also screwed as well as
Yeah, that's
Bitcoin.
I mean, that's
But the probability that that will happen is pretty high, because it has happened to all the other hashing algorithms. MD5 is a great example. It was subjected to many, many attacks. And so a lot of shortcuts were found to create similar or exactly equal MD5 hashes. So Google with Chrome and Firefox, Netscape had to take out certificates that were signed with MD5 because it's just no longer secure.
Interesting. I was just going to say, because that's actually a real common criticism, is people say, well, you generate a random public and private key. Like, what if somebody generates the exact same one that I did?
I'm working it.
Yeah, so there was actually, somebody actually addressed this. There's 10 or 2 to the 160 power different wallets. So basically what that means is they estimate on the Earth there's 7.5 million trillion grains of sand. And if each one of those grains of sand was another Earth with all that sand, that's how many different wallets there are.
And one of the problems with that is that you are assuming that there is true random numbers
Right.
in computers generating the keys. There have been problems in the past with, like, Ubuntu and Debian had removed a line from the OpenSSH source code that caused their random number generation for the keys to be 65,000.
Right. No, you're right. Like, well, yeah, when generating it, like, depending on what you're using to generate, yeah, it could not actually be random.
And so a lot of computers aren't capable of generating true random numbers. And there's a paper that was published within the last 3 months where they're using sensitive microphones to listen to the noise that the CPU makes when it's doing calculations, and they're able to shortcut and know what random numbers
Almost like
the
listening to
CPU
a
made by listening to the chip.
They can listen to how hard it's working basically at any given time. Yeah, it's crazy, crazy stuff.
So it's all built on a fairly weak foundation, actually, that you can't really get the true random number.